She froze mid-bite, her spoon trembling. In the sun-drenched morning kitchen, little Emma stopped eating her cereal, her wide, innocent eyes fixed on the television screen. A new perfume commercial for Alden and Company was airing, and the woman's voiceover, a warm, resonant alto that felt like a half-forgotten lullaby, made the color drain from the child's face. "That's my mom's voice," Emma whispered, the words barely audible. Across the table, Daniel, her single father, and the CEO of a rival corporation, went utterly stithylicil. He had believed the secret buried for 8 long years was nothing more than ash and memory. But now, that voice was back, weaving through the airwaves, piercing through every carefully constructed lie. The spoon slipped from Emma's fingers, clattering against the polished floor with a sharp, metallic ring. Daniel forced a smile, but his lips were dry and stiff. She looked up at him, her clear blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Dad, why does Mom sound alive?" Outside, a national media campaign was just beginning to unfold, and the woman in that voice, she had never truly disappeared. The lingering echo of the perfume commercial hung in the air, a ghost made of sound waves. Daniel's gaze was locked on the television, where a sleek bottle now spun in slow motion, but all he could hear was the disembodied voice that had just shattered the morning's peace. The silver spoon lay on the floor, a gleaming punctuation mark to his daughter's impossible question. He finally broke the spell, his movements stiff as he leaned down to retrieve it. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. He had spent 2,922 days building a fortress of normalcy around Emma, a world where her mother was a beautiful, static memory, confined to photographs and gentle stories. A world where Lena was gone. This single 30-second advertisement had just leveled it to the ground. He placed the spoon on the counter, his hand unsteady. "Honey, it just sounds like her," he said, the lie tasting like rust in his mouth. He tried to keep his tone light, dismissive, the way he would when explaining away a monster in the closet. "There are many people in the world with similar voices. It's just a coincidence, that's all." But as he looked at Emma, he saw his own panic reflected in her searching eyes. She wasn't a toddler anymore. She was a child on the cusp of understanding that adults kept secrets. She knew his smile didn't reach his eyes. He saw the flicker of doubt, the first tiny crack in the foundation of trust he had so carefully maintained. He remembered Lena's voice not as a vague memory, but as a living, breathing entity. He remembered its texture when she whispered goodnight to a baby Emma, its soaring power when she recorded in the studio, and its quiet vulnerability during their late-night talks. The voice on the television wasn't just like Lena's. It was hers. He forced himself to turn away, busying his hands with clearing the table, the clink of ceramic on granite, a desperate attempt to fill the suffocating silence. His mind reeled back through the years, landing on that horrific night. The explosion at the recording studio, the chaos of sirens, the acrid smell of smoke, the official reports that followed. An electrical fire, they had said. A tragic accident. Lena, caught in the inferno, was gone. There was no body to bury, only fragments and forensic reports that offered no comfort. He had held a memorial service with a closed casket, accepting the world's condolences while his own world had ceased to exist. In the raw aftermath of his grief, a darker thought had sometimes taken root, a desperate, irrational seed of doubt. He recalled how overwhelmed she had been in the months leading up to it, the crushing weight of her fame, the relentless pressure from her record label. Had she been sick? Had she confessed a hidden illness he had failed to see? The thought that she might have faked her own death to escape it all had been a fleeting, painful whisper he'd quickly silenced. It was the kind of desperate theory a grieving mind concocts to make sense of the senseless. He had dismissed it then, burying it under the practical realities of raising a daughter alone. Now, that buried thought resurfaced, venomous and sharp. What if it wasn't a theory? What if she had run away, leaving him and Emma behind? He looked at the television, now showing the morning news, and felt a cold fury mix with his fear. Was this her way of reaching out, or a cruel, careless mistake? Emma was still watching him, her breakfast forgotten. "But it was her favorite song," she said softly, her voice trembling. "The one she hummed to me. You said she wrote it for me." The melody in the commercial had been a variation of a lullaby Lena had composed, a private piece of their family's history now being used to sell perfume to the masses. The intimacy of it was a violation. Daniel's composure finally cracked. He grabbed the remote and switched the television off, plunging the room into an abrupt, heavy silence. "Finish your breakfast, Emma. We're going to be late for school," he ordered, his voice sterner than he intended. The command was a shield, a desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative that was spiraling away from him. Emma flinched, but did as she was told, her small shoulders slumped in disappointment. The drive to school was tense, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. He watched her walk up the school steps, a small figure in a world that suddenly felt vast and hostile. After he dropped her off, he drove not to his office, but to a secluded park overlooking the city. He sat in his car, the engine off, the quiet hum of the metropolis a distant roar. The voice from the morning echoed in his mind, not as a memory anymore, but as a challenge, a promise, a threat. The past was no longer the past. It was alive, it was speaking, and it was demanding to be heard. The drive back to his office was a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes, the city's familiar architecture rendered meaningless by the storm. Raging inside him, Daniel bypassed his executive suite, heading straight for the marketing department on the 37th floor. He moved with a cold, clipped precision that was a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. He was a CEO, a man who solved problems with data, strategy, and relentless pressure. This was a problem, perhaps the most significant of his life, and he would attack it with the only tools he knew. He summoned his head of marketing, a sharp woman named Isabel, to a glass-walled conference room. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, his back to her, watching the distant, indifferent flow of traffic below. He described the Alden & Company commercial, his voice devoid of emotion, and gave her a single, non-negotiable directive. Find the production house, the ad agency, and the name of the sound engineer who mixed the audio. He wanted it all, and he wanted it before lunch. By 11 o'clock, Isabel had delivered a concise one-page report. The campaign was managed by a boutique agency named Aura Creatives. The campaign director was a man named Harper Vance. Daniel felt a jolt at the name. He didn't know it personally, but he had a vague recollection of Lena mentioning him once or twice in passing years ago. A sound designer, she had called him. A genius with an almost fanatical devotion to acoustic purity. The discovery that this was not some faceless corporate entity, but a man with a tangible link to Lena's past, solidified Daniel's resolve. He canceled his afternoon, clearing his schedule with a terse instruction to his assistant. He drove to the address listed for Aura Creatives, a sleek, minimalist building in the city's arts district, all polished concrete and smoked glass. The space felt more like an art gallery than an office, with stark white walls and a profound, curated silence. Harper Vance's office was at the end of a long, white corridor. He was a man who seemed to have been designed by the same minimalist architect as his surroundings. Tall, thin, dressed in impeccably tailored black. His handshake was cool and dry. Daniel got straight to the point, foregoing any pretense of professional courtesy. "I need to know about the voice in the Alden commercial," Daniel said, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "Who is she?" Harper gestured for Daniel to sit, but he remained standing, an imposing figure radiating controlled urgency. A faint, knowing smile played on Harper's lips. "It's a beautiful piece of work, isn't it?" he replied, his voice a smooth, modulated baritone. Pure, resonant. We felt an AI-generated voice would lack the necessary soul, so we insisted on a genuine human recording. The authenticity is what sells. The casual mention of a real recording sent another chill through Daniel. The lie he told Emma was a fantasy. The truth was a nightmare. "I didn't ask for a critique of your work. I asked for a name," Daniel pressed, his voice low and dangerous. Harper leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, looking at Daniel with an expression that was part pity, part condescension. It was the look of a gatekeeper, a man who enjoyed holding the key. "The artist values her privacy above all else. Our contract with her is built on a foundation of absolute anonymity. She provides the voice. We provide the platform. It's a simple, elegant arrangement." Daniel felt a surge of frustration. This man was stonewalling him, hiding behind legal jargon and artistic pretense. He looked around the sterile office, searching for a crack in the facade. His eyes landed on a framed photograph on a side table, deliberately turned away. It was the only personal item in the room. He felt a sudden, sickening suspicion that this was more than professional for Harper. The way he spoke of the artist, with such protective reverence, felt proprietary, almost intimate. It was the tone of a man guarding not just a client, but a lover. "This is not a business inquiry, Mr. Vance. This is a personal matter," Daniel said, his voice tightening. "That voice belongs to my late wife." For the first time, Harper's calm exterior faltered. A flicker of something unreadable, surprise, or perhaps fear, crossed his face before being expertly masked. He stood up and walked to the window, mirroring Daniel's earlier stance. "Lena," Harper said, his back still to Daniel. The name hung in the air, a confirmation and an accusation all at once. She had a gift, a voice that could make the world stop and listen. A tragedy. What happened? He spoke of her in the past tense, a deliberate choice that felt like a carefully placed jab. "Some gifts are too powerful to stay buried forever," Harper continued, turning back to face him. She wanted to be heard, not seen. The phrase was delivered like a sacred text, a cryptic clue wrapped in a riddle. Daniel felt his control slipping. He was an intruder in a story he didn't understand, a story Harper clearly knew intimately. He took a step forward, his fists clenched. "What does that mean? Where is she?" Harper simply shook his head, that maddeningly calm smile returning. "I've told you all I can. The voice is real. The artist is private. That is the end of our arrangement." He walked over to his desk and picked up a small, silver object, holding it out to Daniel. It was a USB drive, cold and impersonal. "The raw audio file," Harper said, his voice softening slightly. "Unmixed. No effects, no music, just her. Perhaps it will bring you some closure." The offer was both a concession and a dismissal, a peace offering designed to end the conversation. Daniel took the drive, its metallic shell feeling heavy and cold in his palm. It was a tangible piece of the mystery, a key that might unlock nothing but more pain. He knew Harper was giving him this to make him go away, to offer him a ghost to chase so that he would leave the real person alone. As Daniel turned to leave, the silence was broken one last time by Harper's voice. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "she never sang for anyone the way she sang for you." Daniel didn't listen to the recording right away. He drove home, the small silver USB drive a cold, heavy weight in his pocket, a promise of either solace or deeper torment. He waited until the house was still, long after the housekeeper had left for the evening, the setting sun casting long, lonely shadows across the living room floor. He poured himself a glass of amber whiskey, the sharp burn a familiar and grounding sensation. Then, with a deep, unsteady breath, he slid the drive into his laptop. He put on a pair of high-fidelity headphones, the same kind Lena used to use, and closed his eyes, isolating himself in a world of pure sound. There was a soft hiss of static, then an intake of breath, a sound so intimate, so uniquely her, that his own breath hitched in his chest. And then she spoke. It wasn't the polished, resonant voice from the commercial. This was raw, unedited. He could hear the slight rustle of her clothes, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her voice as she held a note, the soft parting of her lips before she formed a word. It was Lena, stripped of all artifice, present and alive in his ears. He listened for over an hour, the single track on a repeating loop, each replay a fresh wave of grief and rage. This was not a ghost. This was a living woman. Harper Vance's cryptic words about her wanting to be heard, not seen, echoed in his mind, feeling less like a clue and more like a taunt. The recording was proof of life, but it was also a dead end. An anonymous file designed to lead nowhere. But Daniel hadn't built a billion-dollar tech empire by accepting dead ends. The next morning, he used the full, formidable weight of his corporate resources. He assigned a discrete internal team, legal and forensic accounting, a single task, to trace the provenance of that 30-second audio clip. They were to follow the money, the digital fingerprints, the copyright filings. They worked with quiet, ruthless efficiency, and by the end of the day, the trail had led them to a single, unavoidable name. The copyright for the vocal performance was held by a shell corporation, which, after 3 layers of legal obfuscation, was wholly owned by Alden and Company. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Alden and Company wasn't just a competitor, it was Vivian Alden's company. Vivian had been Lena's best friend since college, her maid of honor, Emma's godmother. He remembered a younger Vivian, full of laughter and fierce loyalty, the 3 of them sharing cheap wine on the fire escape of their first apartment, dreaming of the future. After Lena's death, Vivian had been a pillar of support for a few months, bringing casseroles and offering tearful condolences. Then, she had slowly, deliberately, faded away. Her calls became less frequent, her visits ceased altogether, and soon their shared history was reduced to a polite, distant nod if they happened to be at the same industry charity event. At the time, Daniel had assumed it was her way of coping with the grief, a painful reminder she couldn't bear. Now, her withdrawal felt sinister, like the careful retreat of a co-conspirator. The betrayal was a fresh wound on top of an old one. That very evening, Cum was hosting a lavish gala to launch the perfume from the commercial. It was the centerpiece of their new campaign, an exclusive event for investors, media, and the city's elite. Daniel was not on the list. He didn't need to be. He walked into the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, his presence immediately sucking the air out of the room. Heads turned, conversations faltered. The CEO of a rival company crashing the biggest product launch of the year was a declaration of war. He scanned the glittering crowd, a sea of champagne flutes and designer gowns, until he saw her. Vivian stood on a raised dais, a vision in a severe, elegant black dress, her back to him as she charmed a circle of reporters. She was just as he remembered, yet harder, her edges sharpened by success and secrets. He moved through the crowd, his path clearing before him, and stopped directly behind her. "You have something that belongs to me, Viv," he said, his voice low and clear. Vivian Alden froze. She turned around slowly, her public smile dissolving into a mask of controlled composure. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a weary resignation, as if she had been expecting this confrontation for years. She dismissed the reporters with a curt gesture and led him to a secluded balcony overlooking the city lights. The noise of the party faded to a dull thrum. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel," she said, her voice as cold as the night air. "I'm not here for a business dispute," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here for my wife. I'm here for Lena." Vivian looked away, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the cold stone of the balustrade. For a moment, he saw a flicker of the old friend, a shadow of pain in her eyes, before the CEO returned. "You're chasing a ghost," she said flatly. "I heard her voice, Viv. I have the recording. Harper Vance gave it to me." At the mention of Harper's name, her jaw tightened. She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of anger and something that looked almost like fear. "If you still love Lena," she said, her words precise and sharp, "you should leave her in peace. Let her be gone." The warning was not a denial. It was a confirmation wrapped in a threat, a silent contract he was expected to honor. He felt a profound sense of helplessness. Vivian was a fortress, and he had no way to breach her walls. He left the party, the scent of the perfume, Lena's perfume, mocking him as he walked away. Back in the sterile quiet of his empty house, he felt a desperate need to connect with the woman he had lost, to find a clue he had overlooked in his initial grief-stricken haze. He found himself in their old master bedroom, a room he rarely entered, now preserved like a museum. He opened her jewelry box, the scent of her perfume, the real one, still faintly clinging to the velvet lining. He ran his fingers over the familiar objects until he found it, the small, dark blue box that had held her engagement ring. He opened it, expecting it to be empty, but it wasn't. Tucked neatly inside, folded into a tiny square, was a piece of paper. It was a letter, written in Lena's elegant, familiar script. A letter he had never seen before, a silent message from the past, waiting 8 long years to be read. The letter was written on pale blue stationery, the ink slightly faded, the creases in the paper as sharp as the words themselves. Daniel sat at his large empty desk, the only light coming from a single lamp that pooled a warm circle on the wood surface. The house was silent around him, a sleeping giant holding its breath. He read the letter for the 10th time, his fingers tracing the elegant loops of Lena's handwriting. It was not a confession or a farewell. It was a plea. She wrote of being caught in a contract she couldn't break, of a mistake that had spiraled into a gilded cage. "They own my voice, Danny," one line read, a sentence that made no sense 8 years ago, but was now terrifyingly clear. "If I fight this, they will destroy us. Everything I do now, I do to protect you and our sweet Emma. Forgive me for the silence." The letter was undated and unsigned, a fragment of her desperation left behind in the hope that he might one day understand. It shattered the lingering, ugly suspicion that she had abandoned them and replaced it with the horrifying certainty that she had been taken from them. Not by a fire, but by a signature on a page. Vivian's warning on the balcony was no longer a plea to let a grieving memory rest. It was the threat of a jailer guarding her prisoner. His resolve hardened into something cold and sharp. The next day, he began a quiet, internal war, reassigning his most trusted legal minds to dig into every contract Lena ever signed, every corporate entity connected to Vivian Alden. The work was slow, a meticulous excavation of shell companies and legal firewalls. A few days later, while Daniel was in his home office, deep in a labyrinth of financial records. The house phone rang. It was Vivian. Her voice was smooth and saccharine, oozing a manufactured concern that made Daniel's skin crawl. "I just wanted to check in, Danny," she said. "I heard a rumor you were at the gala. I'm so sorry we didn't get a chance to talk. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, hearing a voice that sounds so much like hers." Emma, who had come in to ask for help with her homework, stood near the desk, watching her father's face darken. Daniel kept his own voice level, a carefully controlled monotone. It was more than a sound-alike, Viv, and you know it. He put the call on speaker, his hands needing to be free to grip the edge of his desk. Vivian sighed, a theatrical sound of pity. "Oh, Daniel, grief does strange things. You need to let go." At that moment, Emma, forgotten by the two adults, picked up her father's phone from the desk. She had recently discovered the voice memo app and had taken to recording little songs and messages for the mother she only knew from pictures. She saw the app's red button, a familiar circle, and, with the simple, innocent logic of a child, she pressed it. She wanted to record the voice of the lady who sounded so mean to her dad. She wanted to play it back later, to understand why it made him so sad. She held the phone, a silent observer in the crossfire. Daniel, meanwhile, pressed on, his voice low. "I found a letter she left, Vivian. She was trapped." A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. When Vivian spoke again, the fake sympathy was gone, replaced by a sharp, venomous whisper, a command meant to terrify him into submission. "You are playing with fire. You will destroy her legacy, and his life will be ruined if you keep digging. He must not find out that she is still alive. Do you understand me? Leave it alone." The click of the disconnected call was deafening in the quiet room. Daniel stood frozen, Vivian's words echoing in the air. His gaze fell upon Emma, who was staring at the phone in her hands with wide, frightened eyes. She looked up at him, her lower lip trembling, and held it out. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "I heard her. She said, Mommy is alive." Then she touched the screen, and Vivian's cold, menacing voice filled the room a second time, a perfect digital ghost of the conversation. "He must not find out that she is still alive." The accidental recording was a smoking gun, a clear and undeniable confirmation of the entire conspiracy. All the ambiguity, all the grief-induced doubt, was burned away by the chilling clarity of that one sentence. A cold, cleansing rage washed over Daniel. He had been playing by their rules, investigating in the shadows, honoring a silence that was killing his family. No more. The silent contract was broken. The following morning, Daniel did not go to his office. He contacted a single, highly respected journalist from a national news agency, a woman known for her integrity and tenacity. He gave her the story, all of it. The voice in the commercial, the existence of his late wife, the stonewalling from Alden and Company, and the veiled threats from its CEO. He didn't share the recording of Vivian. That was his trump card, his ace in the hole for a later fight. But he provided enough to light a fire. The story broke that evening. It was a media explosion. The initial curiosity about the perfume voice transformed overnight into a national obsession. News channels ran the commercial on a loop, juxtaposing it with pictures of a smiling, vibrant Lena Wallace from 8 years ago. Headlines screamed from online news sites. CEO claims dead singer wife is alive. The ghost in the machine. The mystery of the Alden perfume voice. A husband's desperate search. The story had everything. Mystery, tragedy, a powerful corporation, and the enduring hope of a love that transcended even death. The public was captivated, and the full, unrelenting weight of the media machine turned its eye directly upon Vivian Alden. The game had changed. The whispers behind glass were now a public roar. The public firestorm Daniel had ignited created the exact kind of pressure he had anticipated. Under the relentless glare of the media spotlight, corporate and legal entities began to fracture. Anonymous sources deep within Alden & Co., fearing the legal ramifications of a cover-up, started to leak information. The first crucial document landed in Daniel's secure inbox just 2 days after the story broke. It was a scanned copy of a contract, its dense legalese a testament to its sinister purpose. Daniel read it in his office, the city lights twinkling outside his window like a million indifferent stars. The contract was not for a one-time voiceover. It was a comprehensive and perpetual vocal asset acquisition agreement. Signed by Lena just 1 week before the studio fire, it effectively sold the exclusive, worldwide rights to her voice, her likeness, her sound, her entire vocal identity, to Alden & Company for a staggering sum, paid into an untraceable offshore account. It was a Faustian bargain, a modern-day slave contract for a soul made of sound. The document was a revelation, but the most damning detail was buried in a subclause on page 12. It stipulated that in the event of the asset's incapacitation or legal death, the contract would remain in full force, granting Alden & Company the right to utilize all existing and future recordings. The fire was no longer a tragic accident. It was a strategic corporate maneuver. They hadn't killed her, but they had orchestrated her death to gain complete and unchallenged control over her most valuable asset. The pain Daniel felt was sharp and profound. He had mourned a wife who was never gone, raising their daughter on a foundation of lies he hadn't even known he was telling. The search for a person had become a search for justice. His team, now armed with the contract's specific details, dug deeper, and soon they unearthed the second piece of the puzzle, a series of encrypted emails between Vivian Alden and Harper Vance. The emails revealed a conspiracy far more personal and twisted than Daniel could have imagined. Vivian hadn't been the sole architect of this scheme. Harper Vance was the true puppet master. He had been the one to first identify the unique commercial potential of Lena's voice, not just as a singer, but as a pure, disembodied sound. He had cultivated a relationship with her, preying on her artistic insecurities and her growing weariness of the public eye. He had framed the contract as an escape, a way for her to step away from fame while still providing for her family. He convinced her it was a brilliant, avant-garde artistic statement, to become a voice without a face. Vivian, motivated by a toxic cocktail of jealousy over Lena's talent and a ruthless desire to build her corporate empire, had provided the capital and the legal machinery. It was Harper who had manipulated both women, playing them against each other, positioning himself as the indispensable creative genius who could make it all happen. He was enriching himself from the deal, a silent partner taking a massive cut from both the initial contract and the ongoing perfume campaign. Then came the midpoint reversal, the piece of evidence that changed everything. The raw audio file Harper had given him, that supposed peace offering, was the key. Driven by a hunch, Daniel had sent the file to a forensic audio expert. The expert's report came back that afternoon, and it was explosive. The file was not just a raw recording, it was a masterfully edited piece of audio. The expert had found microscopic digital artifacts, subtle frequency manipulations that were undetectable to the human ear. Harper hadn't just recorded Lena's voice, he had been subtly altering it, digitally perfecting it, and, most damningly, compiling a library of her phonemes and vocal patterns. He was building the foundation for a sophisticated AI model of her voice, one that could eventually speak or sing anything he desired. He was planning to make the real Lena obsolete. The USB drive wasn't a clue to find her, it was a tool to replace her. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Daniel remembered the single, chilling phrase from the expert's report. The primary vocal track is authentic, but there is a secondary, suppressed audio layer. With a few keystrokes, Daniel isolated and amplified this hidden layer. It was a man's voice, low and indistinct, speaking just before Lena began. It was Harper, coaching her, his tone soft, but laced with steel. "Just one more time, Lena," the ghost in the machine whispered. "Sing it for her. For Emma." He had been using her daughter as leverage, twisting the knife of her love and her sacrifice to get the perfect take. The reversal was complete. Vivian wasn't the ultimate villain. She was a pawn, just as Lena was. Harper Vance, the quiet artist in the background, was the true monster, a manipulator who had turned one woman into a ghost and the other into a jailer, all for the sake of profit and a perverse sense of control. The fight was no longer just about finding Lena. It was about exposing the man who had stolen her voice. The press conference was held in a cavernous, impersonal hotel ballroom, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and the electric hum of anticipation. Every major news network had a camera crew present, their lenses forming a dark, glassy forest aimed at the empty podium. Daniel had orchestrated the event with the same meticulous precision he would use for a global product launch. He had sent personal, formal invitations to 2 specific guests, ensuring they would be given front-row seats. He watched them arrive from the wings of the stage. Vivian Alden entered first, a portrait of defiant elegance in a steel-gray suit, her lawyer at her side. She looked bored, untouchable, as if this were a minor annoyance she was obligated to endure. Harper Vance followed moments later, not with a lawyer, but with an air of smug satisfaction. He clearly believed this was his vindication, a public stage on which Daniel would make a fool of himself, generating millions in free publicity for the campaign. He nodded at Vivian as he took his seat, a co-conspirator's greeting she pointedly ignored. Daniel walked onto the stage. 1,000 camera flashes went off at once, a silent, blinding volley of lightning. He did not flinch. He stood at the podium, his face calm, his presence filling the vast room. He looked directly at the assembled press, then let his gaze settle for a moment on Vivian and Harper. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady and clear, amplified by the speakers. "For 8 years, I, along with the world, believed my wife, Lena Wallace, was dead. I am here today to tell you that was a lie." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. He raised a hand and the room fell silent again. He didn't start with accusations. He started with a story. He spoke of Lena, the artist, the mother and the wife. Then, with a click of a button, the now infamous perfume commercial played on the massive screen behind him. Lena's disembodied voice filling the ballroom with its haunting, familiar warmth. "That voice," Daniel said as the commercial ended, "was sold. It was taken." He presented his evidence piece by piece, building his case with cold, irrefutable logic. The vocal asset acquisition contract appeared on the screen, its predatory clauses highlighted in red. He showed the complex web of shell corporations and the flow of money from Alden and Company into an offshore account managed by a holding company owned by Harper Vance. With each slide, the confidence on Vivian's face began to erode, replaced by a rigid, brittle tension. Harper, for his part, began to look less smug and more unsettled, shifting in his seat as his name and financial dealings were laid bare for the world to see. Daniel then displayed the encrypted emails, the conversation in which Harper and Vivian discussed the asset's legal death as a necessary step to secure their investment. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from curious to predatory. Reporters were typing furiously, whispering into headsets. This was no longer a grieving husband's desperate fantasy. It was the public dissection of a massive corporate crime. Vivian Alden enabled this, Daniel stated, his voice ringing with conviction. But Harper Vance was the architect. He saved the most damning piece of evidence for last. He projected a high-resolution image of Lena's death certificate onto the screen. This document was filed 2 days after the fire, he explained. It was certified and submitted by the county coroner's office, or so it would appear. He clicked again, and an internal document from the coroner's office appeared beside it, showing all filings for that week. Lena Wallace's was not among them. The death certificate, Daniel announced, his voice dropping, is a forgery, and our forensic accounting has traced the $500,000 payment to the clerk who falsified the entry directly back to Mr. Vance. All eyes swiveled to Harper. The blood drained from his face. The artist's mask was gone, revealing the cornered, panicked criminal beneath. It was in that moment of rising chaos, as reporters began to shout questions, that a side door near the stage opened. A hush fell over the room. Emma walked out, holding her father's smartphone in both hands. She looked impossibly small, a tiny figure in a simple dress, her eyes wide as she took in the sea of faces and cameras. Daniel immediately walked to her, crouching so he was at her level, his body shielding her from the worst of the attention. He spoke to her softly, his words inaudible to the audience, but his actions clear. He was a father first. Emma nodded, her expression firm with a child's unshakable sense of purpose. She had insisted on doing this. She wanted to help. Daniel stood and turned back to the podium, holding a microphone down to the phone she held up. "My daughter has something she would like you all to hear," he said. Emma pressed the screen. A moment of static, and then a voice. Vivian's voice. Cold, sharp, and stripped of all pretense, sliced through the silent ballroom. "You are playing with fire. You will destroy her legacy and his life will be ruined if you keep digging. He must not find out that she is still alive. Do you understand me? Leave it alone." The recording ended. For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute profound silence. It was the sound of a reputation turning to ash. Then, the dam broke. Every camera in the room swiveled to Vivian Alden. The sound of their shutters was like a machine gun. She didn't scream or protest. Her carefully constructed facade simply disintegrated. Her shoulders slumped, and a raw, guttural sob escaped her lips. The CEO, the Ice Queen, the untouchable titan of industry, shattered. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with the force of a guilt 8 years in the making. The public exposure was absolute. The catharsis was brutal. Daniel didn't watch her collapse. He gently took the phone from Emma, lifted her into his arms, and walked off the stage, leaving the feeding frenzy to the sharks he had just unleashed. The fallout from the press conference was a media supernova. Harper Vance was arrested before he could even leave the hotel, his face a pale mask of disbelief. Vivian Alden, after a complete and public breakdown, was placed on an indefinite leave of absence from her company, which was now drowning in a sea of lawsuits and federal investigations. The world was loud, a cacophony of breaking news alerts, shouting pundits, and endless speculation. But in the eye of the storm, Daniel's world had gone completely silent. He had taken Emma home, cocooning her from the chaos he had unleashed, and waited. He didn't know what for exactly. He only knew that the truth was finally out, a beacon lit in the darkness. The message came late that night, a simple, untraceable text with an address to a quiet suburban house on the other side of the city. There was no name, but he knew. He drove through the sleeping streets, his heart a steady, heavy drum in his chest. The house was modest, anonymous, with a single light on in a downstairs window. He walked up the path, the key left under the mat as promised, and let himself in. The air was still, and the house was sparsely furnished, a place of transit, not a home. And then he saw her. She was standing by the window, looking out at the dark street, her back to him. She was thinner than he remembered, her hair cut shorter, but it was her. It was Lena. She turned slowly as she heard the door click shut, and the 8 years that had separated them collapsed into a single, breathless moment. There were no tears, not yet. There was only a profound, aching recognition, a quiet collision of two halves of a soul that had been torn apart for nearly 3,000 days. "Danny," she whispered, her voice, the voice that had haunted him and driven him, now fragile and real. They didn't stay in that sterile, borrowed house. The next day, they went to the one place that felt truly theirs, the old recording studio. Daniel had preserved it exactly as it was, a locked-away sanctuary of memory. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light that cut through the tall windows. The mixing board was covered in a white sheet, and a faint, pleasant scent of old wood and ozone hung in the air. In the center of the live room, under its own shroud, was the vintage microphone she had always favored, the one that had captured her most iconic recordings. Lena walked to it, her fingers tracing its familiar contours. It was here, surrounded by the ghosts of their shared past, that they finally spoke. He told her about raising Emma, about the moments of joy and the deep, abiding loneliness. She told him about her gilded cage, a life of silent, comfortable isolation, watching her daughter grow up in photographs, her only connection to the world the sound of her own voice, stolen and sold back to her through a television screen. "I found your letter," Daniel said, his voice quiet but resonant in the acoustically perfect room. "The one in the ring box. You were going to tell me, weren't you? Before the fire." Lena's eyes filled with a pain that was 8 years old. "I was going to break the contract," she confessed, her gaze fixed on the microphone as if it were a confessional. "I couldn't bear the silence, the lies. I wrote that letter to try and explain, to ask you to forgive me for the mess I'd made. I was coming to the studio that night to meet you, to tell you everything and figure out a way to fight them together." She finally looked at him, her eyes clear with a terrible truth. "But I never made it. Harper met me in the parking lot. He told me there had been an accident. He said the fire was a message. He told me if I ever tried to come back, if I ever tried to contact you or Emma, the next accident wouldn't be a warning." The final piece of the story locked into place. She hadn't been a willing participant in the lie. She had been a hostage, silenced not just by a contract, but by a direct threat against the two people she loved most. Justice, Daniel realized, was not about watching Harper Vance spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. It was not about the financial ruin of Vivian Alden. Justice was this. It was standing in a quiet room with the woman he loved, finally understanding the truth. It was the simple, profound act of hearing her, not as a voice on a recording, but as a person, a survivor. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It felt like coming home. The real reunion, the one that truly mattered, happened the next morning. Daniel brought Lena back to the house, to the sun-drenched kitchen where the nightmare had begun. Emma was at the table, quietly eating her cereal, when she looked up and saw her. She froze, her spoon held halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide. It was the woman from the photographs, the woman with the voice, But she was real, standing in their kitchen, her hands gripping her father's. Lena knelt, her movements slow and gentle, not wanting to frighten the child she had only held in her dreams. She didn't speak. She just looked at her daughter, her heart an open wound of love and sorrow and hope. Then she began to hum. It was the lullaby, the melody from the commercial, the song she had written for her baby girl all those years ago. The melody wound its way through the quiet room, a thread of sound stitching the past to the present. Emma's eyes filled with tears, not of confusion, but of a deep, primal recognition. She put her spoon down on the table, the very same spoon that had clattered to the floor what felt like a lifetime ago. This time, it made no sound. She slid off her chair, took a hesitant step forward, and then another, until she was standing right in front of the mother she had never known. "Mom?" she whispered. Lena's composure finally broke, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Yes, my sweet girl," she sang softly, her voice thick with emotion. "It's me." The morning voice had returned, no longer a ghost from a speaker, but a living, breathing promise, filling their home with the undeniable, unbreakable sound of love.